The Verath hegemony had ruled their sector of space for 11,000 years. They had conquered 17 species, absorbed 42 independent worlds, and built an empire that stretched across 3 galactic arms. Their military was legendary. Their technology was envied. Their cruelty was whispered about in the darkest corners of space stations from one end of the galaxy to the other.
Commander Thyrax stood on the bridge of the Dominator's Claw, watching the holographic display with all 4 of his primary eyes. His secondary eyes, the smaller pair positioned above his cranial ridge, remained fixed on the tactical readouts that scrolled along the side of his command throne. His chitinous fingers tapped against the armrest with the quiet satisfaction of a predator who knew his prey was already caught. "The human convoy has entered the corridor," his tactical officer reported. 7 vessels, 4 cargo haulers, 2 passenger liners, 1 escort frigate.
"One escort frigate," Thyrax repeated, allowing his mandibles to click in what passed for amusement among his species. "These humans truly are as foolish as the intelligence reports suggested."
The Verath had been watching humanity for 3 standard cycles now, ever since the strange bipedal creatures had emerged from their isolated corner of the Orion Arm and begun establishing trade relationships with the Galactic Assembly. The humans were newcomers, barely 500 years into their interstellar age, a mere blink of an eye compared to the ancient civilizations that dominated galactic politics. And yet, somehow, impossibly, these humans had been gaining influence. They had something the galaxy wanted: advanced computational systems, entertainment media that seemed to captivate every species that encountered it, and a peculiar talent for negotiation that had seen them brokering peace deals between species that had been at war for millennia. The Galactic Assembly had granted them probationary membership status 18 months ago. Since then, human ships had become an increasingly common sight along the major trade routes. Too common, in Thyrax's opinion. "The High Council has grown tired of watching the humans expand their influence," he said, more to himself than to his crew. "They move into our traditional trading territories. They undercut our prices. They charm species that should be cowering before Verath might." He rose from his throne, his armored form casting a long shadow across the bridge. "Today, we remind the galaxy what happens to those who challenge Verath's supremacy."
The Corridor 7-star lane was one of the most heavily trafficked routes in the sector, a naturally occurring phenomenon where the fabric of space-time was thin enough to allow for efficient, faster-than-light travel. Dozens of species used it daily, their ships riding the gravitational currents that made the lanes so valuable for commerce. But Corridor 7 also passed through Verath-claimed space. And while the Galactic Assembly had negotiated passage rights that technically allowed civilian vessels of member species to transit unmolested, the Verath had always found ways to assert their dominance. A customs inspection here, a routine security check there. Enough harassment to remind everyone who truly controlled the lane, but never quite enough to trigger formal diplomatic consequences. Today would be different. "Bring us out of stealth," Thyrax commanded. "All ships, attack formation. I want that convoy disabled before they can send a distress signal." The Dominator's Claw shimmered into visibility, followed by 6 more Verath warships that had been lurking in the gravitational shadows of a nearby asteroid field. They were Hunter-class vessels designed for exactly this kind of ambush. Fast, heavily armed, and equipped with jamming systems that could blind most species' communication arrays. On the bridge of the human escort frigate USS Resolute,
Captain Sarah Chen was in the middle of her third cup of coffee when the tactical officer's voice cut through the quiet routine of the watch.
Captain, we have multiple contacts emerging from behind that asteroid cluster. Bearing 27 Mark IV. I'm reading. 7 vessels, warship configuration, Verith signatures. Chen set down her coffee cup with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned not to waste good caffeine. She was a small woman, compact and efficient in the way that career naval officers often became after decades of serving in the confined spaces of starships. Her dark hair was shot through with gray, and the lines around her eyes spoke to too many sleepless nights spent shepherding civilian ships through dangerous space. "Sound general quarters," she said calmly. "Helm, put us between the convoy and those contacts. Comms, get me a tight beam to Starbase Gamma. Use the emergency protocols." The klaxons began to wail throughout the Resolute, and crew members who had been going about their routine duties suddenly found themselves running to battle stations. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Marcus Powell was already bringing the reactor to combat power, his hands moving across the control interfaces with the muscle memory of 15 years of service. "Captain," the communications officer said, her voice tight with controlled tension, "they're jamming us. I can't get a signal out. Standard jamming, wide spectrum. It's military grade." "Keep trying. Find a gap in their coverage." Chen studied the tactical display, watching the Verith ships spread into a classic pincer formation. They weren't just posturing. This was an attack approach. "All civilian vessels, this is Resolute Actual. Increase speed and maintain formation. We're going to punch through." But even as she gave the order, she knew the math didn't work. 7 Varath Hunter-class warships against 1 frigate. The Resolute was a good ship with a good crew, but she wasn't designed for this kind of fight. Her job was to deter pirates and protect against opportunistic raiders, not to stand against a full Varath attack squadron. The first volley of Varath plasma fire streaked across the void, and the battle began. Chapter 2. Blood in the Void. The Resolute lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of desperate maneuvering, of shields flaring under impacts, of damage control teams racing from one breach to the next. 11 minutes of Captain Chen doing everything in her power to keep her ship between the Varath weapons and the civilians she had sworn to protect. It wasn't enough. The Varath were experienced hunters, and they knew exactly how to take down a cornered frigate. 2 of their ships kept the Resolute occupied, while the other 5 swept around to attack the convoy from multiple angles. The passenger liner Horizon Star was the first to die, her hull split open by concentrated plasma fire that turned her engineering section into a funeral pyre for the 437 souls aboard. Chen watched it happen on her tactical display, watched the life signs wink out one by one, and felt something cold settle into her heart. Not defeat, something older than that. Something that reached back through generations of warriors who had faced overwhelming odds and refused to break. "All power to forward shields," she ordered. "Ram us into their lead ship." Her helmsman, a young lieutenant named Tommy Park, didn't hesitate. His hands moved across the controls, and the Resolute surged forward on a collision course with the Dominator's claw. It was a suicide run, and everyone on the bridge knew it. But if they could take out the enemy commander, if they could buy even a few more minutes for the remaining ships to escape. They made it halfway. The Varath targeting systems were too precise, their weapons too powerful. A volley from 3 ships struck the Resolute simultaneously, overwhelming her shields and tearing through her hull. The main reactor containment failed, and for one brief moment, the frigate became a second sun in the darkness of space. Captain Sarah Chen died at her post, her hands still on the arm of her command chair, her last thought a prayer for the souls she couldn't save. In the aftermath,
The Varath moved through the debris field with methodical precision. They destroyed the cargo haulers one by one, not bothering to investigate their contents. This wasn't about profit. This was about sending a message.
The second passenger liner, the Dawn's Light, tried to surrender. Her captain broadcast on all frequencies, offering to submit to boarding, offering anything if the Varath would just stop shooting. Commander Thyrax responded by ordering his ships to target her life support systems specifically. He wanted the humans to suffocate slowly, to have time to understand what was happening to them. 612 people died on the Dawn's Light, including 183 children traveling to visit family on the colony world of New Helsinki. When it was over, when the last life sign had faded from the Varath sensors, Thyrax stood amid the wreckage and felt the satisfaction of total victory. The humans had proven to be exactly what he expected: weak, soft, easy prey. "Leave the debris," he commanded. "Let it drift. Let other human ships find their dead and know what happens when they dare to challenge the Varath hegemony." But Thyrax made one mistake, one small oversight that would cost his entire civilization everything. Deep in the expanding cloud of debris that had once been the USS Resolute, a small object drifted, a black box designed to survive the destruction of the ship it served. Its armor was scarred and pitted from the battle, but its core systems remained intact. And when the Varath jamming field finally dissipated, when their ships had moved on to their next patrol, the black box activated its emergency beacon. The signal was weak, barely a whisper in the cosmic background noise. But it was enough. 3 hours after the massacre, a human reconnaissance probe picked up the transmission. 4 hours after that, the data was being played in a secure room at United Earth Military Command on Luna. And 6 hours after that, humanity began to respond. Chapter 3: The Weight of Grief. The news broke across human space like a shockwave. Every major network carried the story. Every social media platform was flooded with expressions of shock, grief, and slowly building rage. The faces of the dead scrolled across screens on 100 worlds. Men and women, old and young, humans of every ethnicity and background who had been going about their lives until violence found them. President James Morrison sat in the Oval Office, watching the casualty reports scroll across his display. He was 63 years old, a former admiral who had spent most of his career helping to build humanity's place among the stars. He had seen death before, too much of it. But this was different. This was murder. Cold, calculated, deliberate murder of human civilians in neutral space. "The Varath are claiming it was a misunderstanding," his Secretary of State said, her holographic image flickering slightly with the lag of the quantum communication link. Their ambassador submitted a formal statement to the Galactic Assembly 30 minutes ago. They're saying it was a case of mistaken identity, that their patrol forces believed the convoy was actually a smuggling operation. "A smuggling operation," Morrison repeated flatly. "They're claiming they mistook 2 passenger liners, clearly marked civilian vessels broadcasting standard identification codes for smugglers." "Yes, sir." Morrison closed his eyes and allowed himself 5 seconds of pure, undiluted fury. Then he opened them again and was once more the calm, measured leader that humanity needed. "What's the Assembly's response?" "Concerned. Very concerned. Several species have issued formal expressions of sympathy. The Thessan Collective and the Vindi Republic have both called for an investigation. But..." The Secretary of State hesitated. "But no one is willing to condemn the Varath directly. They're too powerful, too influential. The Assembly is taking the position that this is a bilateral matter between humanity and the Varath hegemony.
In other words, we're on our own. Yes, sir. That appears to be the message. Morrison nodded slowly. He had expected as much. Humanity was still the new kid on the block, still building relationships and establishing themselves as a serious player in galactic politics. The Assembly would not risk their comfortable relationships with the Varath over the deaths of a few hundred humans. But the Assembly didn't understand something fundamental about humanity. They saw humans as weak, as a soft species that had achieved their position through diplomacy and trade rather than military might. They assumed that humans, when pushed, would fold. They were wrong. "I want a full cabinet meeting in 1 hour," Morrison said. "And get me Admiral Patterson. We need to discuss our military options." "Sir, the Joint Chiefs have already prepared a preliminary assessment. They're recommending a proportional response, targeted strikes against Varath military assets in the region. Surgical, limited, designed to demonstrate our capabilities without escalating to a full conflict." A proportional response? Morrison's jaw tightened. They killed over 2,000 civilians, including children, and our military is recommending proportional? The assessment notes that a full-scale conflict with the Varath hegemony would be challenging. Their military is significantly larger than ours, and they have alliances with several other species that might— "I understand the strategic situation, Madam Secretary." Morrison stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the Luna City sprawling beneath the office's dome. In the distance, he could see the lights of the spaceport where ships came and went, carrying humans to distant worlds. Ships just like the ones that had been destroyed in Corridor 7. "The Varath have ruled their sector for 11,000 years," he said quietly. "They've built their empire on fear. They've conquered species, absorbed worlds, crushed anyone who dared to oppose them. And they did this to us because they thought we were weak, because they thought we would cower and beg and accept whatever scraps they chose to throw us." He turned back to face the hologram of his Secretary of State. "They were wrong, and we're going to make sure they understand exactly how wrong they were." "What are you proposing, sir?" Morrison smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "I'm proposing we show the Varath and the entire galaxy what humanity is capable of when we're truly angry. Get me the director of the Navigation Corps. I have questions about the Corridor 7 star lane." Chapter 4. The Navigation Corps. Most species in the galaxy understood star lanes in simple terms. They were natural phenomena, pathways through space where faster-than-light travel was easier and more efficient. Ancient civilizations had mapped them, and subsequent species had simply followed the established routes. The lanes were part of the cosmic geography, as fixed and unchangeable as the stars themselves. Humanity had a different perspective. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the emergency session of the United Earth Security Council, her presentation filling the massive holographic display that dominated the chamber. She was the director of the Navigation Corps, the organization responsible for humanity's breakthrough in stellar navigation, and what she was about to explain would change the course of galactic history. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, before I proceed, I need to share some information that has been classified at the highest levels for the past 20 years. She paused, looking around the room at the assembled leaders, presidents and prime ministers, military commanders and intelligence chiefs, the most powerful humans in existence. What I'm about to tell you will fundamentally alter your understanding of our position in the galaxy.
She touched a control, and the display shifted to show a complex web of lines stretching across a three-dimensional map of known space. The star lanes, the pathways that connected civilizations and enabled interstellar commerce. As you know, humanity achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 500 years ago. What the public record shows is that we developed our drives based on captured alien technology and spent the subsequent centuries simply learning to navigate the existing Starlane network. She smiled slightly. That is not entirely accurate. During our early years of interstellar travel, our scientists noticed anomalies in the star lanes. Fluctuations in their gravitational signatures, inconsistencies in their behavior that didn't match the theoretical models. We investigated, initially out of pure scientific curiosity. What we discovered was remarkable. The display changed again, showing a close-up view of a single star lane. Within the glowing pathway, complex patterns of energy swirled and flowed. Star lanes are not natural phenomena. They are artificial constructs, engineered pathways created by an extremely advanced civilization that existed roughly 12 billion years ago. The species that created them has been gone for longer than most galaxies have existed, but their infrastructure remains functional. Damaged in places, degraded in others, but fundamentally operational. A murmur ran through the council chamber. This was revelation of the highest order, knowledge that could reshape the entire galactic power structure. The implications of this discovery were immediately apparent to our predecessors. If the star lanes were artificial, they could potentially be modified, altered, controlled. Vasquez let that word hang in the air. For the past 20 years, the Navigation Corps has been developing the technology to do exactly that. President Morrison leaned forward. You're saying we can manipulate the star lanes? Yes, Mr. President, we can. Another gesture, and the display showed a series of technical diagrams. We have developed devices we call gravitational harmonics modulators, or GHMs. When deployed at key nexus points along a star lane, these devices can interact with the ancient infrastructure and alter the lane's properties. We can make a lane more efficient, allowing ships to travel faster. We can make it less stable, forcing ships to slow down or risk structural damage. And, if necessary, we can shut a lane down entirely. Silence fell over the chamber. Every person present understood the implications of what Vasquez was saying. Control of the star lanes meant control of interstellar commerce. It meant control of military movements. It meant power on a scale that no species in the known galaxy had ever possessed. Has this technology been deployed? Asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We have GHM networks installed on 12 major lanes throughout human-controlled space. The Verith don't know they exist. No one does, outside of the Navigation Corps and the highest levels of government. And Corridor 7? Vasquez nodded. Corridor 7 passes through Verath-claimed territory, but the nexus points that govern its behavior are located in unclaimed space. We have been, cautiously, extending our GHM coverage over the past 5 years. We completed installation of a full network on Corridor 7 18 months ago. Morrison stood. What would happen if we activated the GHM network on Corridor 7? Full shutdown? The lane would become impassable to faster-than-light travel within approximately 6 hours of activation. Any ships caught inside the lane when that happened would be dropped back into normal space at random points along the corridor. Those that emerged in the void between stars would be stranded. Those that emerged too close to a stellar body might be caught in its gravitational well. She paused. The effects would last as long as we maintained the network in its active state. Months, years, decades, if we chose.
And the economic impact on the Verath?
Corridor 7 is the primary trade route connecting the Verath core worlds to their outer territories. It handles approximately 40% of their total interstellar commerce. Shutting it down would not destroy the Verath hegemony, but it would cripple them economically. They would face supply shortages, industrial disruption, and significant civilian hardship within weeks. Within months, their peripheral territories might begin to consider whether remaining under Verath rule is in their best interests. Morrison looked around the room. He saw shock on some faces, calculation on others, and on a few, something that looked very much like grim satisfaction. "We're talking about an act of economic warfare on an unprecedented scale," the Secretary of State said carefully. "The Galactic Assembly will not look kindly on this. We could be censured, sanctioned, possibly even expelled from the organization." "The Galactic Assembly didn't look kindly on 2,000 of our citizens being murdered either," Morrison replied. "They expressed concern. They offered sympathy. And then they made it very clear that we were on our own." He walked to the center of the chamber, positioning himself beneath the holographic display. "The Verath attacked us because they believed we were weak. They believed we would accept their false apologies and their lies because we had no other choice. They believed humanity was just another species to be bullied and dominated." His voice hardened. "I say we prove them wrong. I say we show the Verath and every other species watching that humanity will not be victimized, that there are consequences for attacking our people, that we have capabilities they never imagined." "And if they retaliate?" asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. "If they see this as an act of war?" "Then we fight, and we win." Morrison turned to face the display again. "The Verath have been the dominant power in their region for 11,000 years. They've never faced a real challenge. They've never had to fight a war against an enemy that could actually hurt them. They have no idea what humans are capable of when we're unified and motivated." "We're talking about potentially starting an interstellar war," the Secretary of State pressed. "Millions could die." "Millions could die if we do nothing too. The Verath have already demonstrated their willingness to murder our civilians. If we let this attack go unanswered, they'll do it again. Other species will see our weakness and act accordingly. We'll become prey, just like all the other species the Verath have conquered over the millennia." Morrison shook his head. "No, we end this now. We show the galaxy that attacking humanity has consequences. Consequences so severe that no one will ever consider it again." He turned to face the council directly. "I'm calling for a vote. The proposal is to activate the GHM network on Corridor 7 and maintain the shutdown until the Verath hegemony meets our demands. Formal acknowledgement of their responsibility for the massacre, payment of reparations to the families of the victims, and permanent cessation of Verath claims to authority over traffic in the corridor. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. Chapter 5. Darkness Falls. 6 days after the massacre at Corridor 7, humanity activated its greatest secret weapon. The GHM network came online at 0300 hours Universal Standard Time, and across a span of 17 light-years, the fabric of space-time began to shift. The ancient infrastructure that had maintained the star lane for billions of years responded to the new signals being fed into it, and the gravitational harmonics that made faster-than-light travel possible began to destabilize. Ships traveling through the corridor at the moment of activation experienced it as a sudden, violent shudder that ran through their entire structure. Warning alarms blared. Navigation computers reported impossible readings. And then,
One by one, the ships were torn out of hyperspace and dumped back into the normal universe.
Most of them were lucky. They emerged in open space, far from any celestial body, stranded but alive. Their crews would spend days or weeks on emergency power, waiting for rescue ships that would have to travel the long way around, through normal space at sublight speeds. Others were not so lucky. 37 ships emerged too close to the small red dwarf star that the Verath called Keth 4. Caught in its gravitational well, unable to reactivate their drives, they spiraled slowly inward. Some crews managed to evacuate to escape pods, others did not. And in the Verath capital of Thryax Prime, the High Council received the news with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Impossible," declared Overlord Myrinth, the supreme leader of the Verath hegemony. He was ancient even by Verath standards. His chitin faded to a dull gray, his eyes clouded with age, but still burning with the cruel intelligence that had kept him in power for 3 centuries. The humans cannot have this capability. No species can manipulate the star lanes. It has never been done. And yet, Overlord, the lane is closed. Admiral Korth, the commander of the Verath military, gestured to the holographic display that dominated the council chamber. Where the glowing pathway of Corridor 7 should have been, there was only darkness. Our ships cannot enter. Our probes cannot transmit. The lane simply no longer exists. Then we go around it. We use alternate routes. The alternate routes are 5 times longer. The transit time for cargo shipments will increase from days to weeks. The fuel costs alone will devastate our commercial fleet, and that assumes we can even manage the logistics. Korth's voice was carefully neutral, but the implications were clear. The outer territories are already expressing concern about supply disruptions. If this continues for more than a few weeks, we may face serious unrest. The humans did this. Overlord Myrinth's voice was soft, almost wondering. The primitive, soft-skinned humans that we dismissed as irrelevant? They did this? It appears so, Overlord. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. This is clearly a response to the incident at Corridor 7. You mean the attack that Commander Thyrax carried out under my express orders? Myrinth turned to face the Admiral directly. Let us not pretend here, Admiral. I ordered the attack because I believed the humans were weak and that eliminating one of their convoys would remind them of their place. I was wrong. He moved to the display, studying the dead zone where Corridor 7 had been. How long before we can restore the lane? Our scientists are working on it. Initial estimates suggest. They have no estimate, Overlord. They don't understand what the humans have done, let alone how to undo it. The technology involved is beyond anything in our databases. Then find out. Capture a human. Capture 100 humans. I don't care how many you have to take. Find ones who know how this works and make them tell us. Overlord, that would be unwise. Admiral Korth stepped forward, his posture carefully deferential. The humans have clearly demonstrated capabilities we didn't anticipate. If we escalate now, while we're economically vulnerable, we risk provoking a response we cannot counter. You suggest we simply accept this? That we allow ourselves to be humiliated by these creatures? I suggest we negotiate. The humans have made demands: public acknowledgement of responsibility, reparations, territorial concessions. These are significant but not catastrophic. Meeting them would restore the lane and allow us to recover economically. Once we've recovered, once we've had time to study this technology and develop countermeasures, then we can revisit our options."
Myron's mandibles clicked angrily. The idea of negotiating with humans, of bowing to the demands of a species barely 5 centuries into their interstellar age, was galling beyond words. But the alternative was watching his empire slowly strangle as supply lines failed and outer territories drifted away. "Contact the humans," he said finally. "Tell them we are willing to discuss their demands. But make it clear that any further provocations will be met with the full force of the Verith military."
"Yes, Overlord." But even as Admiral Korth departed to carry out his orders, Myronth was already planning his next move. The humans had surprised him once. He would not allow it to happen again. And when the time came, when the Verath had recovered and prepared, there would be a reckoning. Chapter 6. The Galaxy Watches. The news of Corridor 7's closure spread through the galaxy at the speed of quantum communication. Within hours, every major power knew what had happened. Within days, the implications had begun to sink in. Humanity could control the star lanes. On the trading station of Nexus Prime, representatives from a dozen species gathered to discuss the development. The station's vast marketplace was quieter than usual. Traders uncertain about the future, supply chains already beginning to feel the strain of the disruption. Ambassador Thasana of the Thasan Collective stood before a gathering of her peers, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with the patterns that her species used for emotional communication. The colors were complex, mixing concern with a deep, unexpected satisfaction. "The humans have done what we always wished we could do," she said, her translator rendering her fluting speech into standard galactic. "They have stood up to the Verath. They have proven that the hegemony is not invincible. They have also demonstrated that they are willing to use weapons of mass economic destruction," countered Ambassador Corvin of the Mercantile League. His species was small, furred, and intensely focused on commerce. The closure of Corridor 7 had hit the League hard. They had significant trade relationships with Veroth-controlled worlds. Today it is the Veroth, tomorrow it could be any of us. The humans have made no threats against anyone else. Their actions were in direct response to an unprovoked attack on their civilians. And if they decide that someone else has wronged them, if they determine that their interests are being threatened, this technology gives them power beyond anything the galaxy has seen since the Builders disappeared. We cannot simply accept that." "What would you suggest?" asked Ambassador Qatar of the Vindi Republic. "Would you have us attack the humans? I suspect that would end poorly for whoever attempted it." The debate continued for hours, and similar debates were happening on thousands of worlds. The galaxy was recalibrating its understanding of the power structure. For millennia, might had made right. The species with the largest fleets and the most weapons had dictated terms to everyone else. The Verath were simply the most recent example of this eternal truth. But humanity had changed the equation. They had shown that raw military power was not the only form of strength. In a galaxy dependent on interstellar trade, control of the trade routes was just as important as control of battle fleets, perhaps more so. And humanity, it seemed, had quietly acquired that control without anyone noticing. In the Galactic Assembly, the human representative faced a barrage of questions from concerned species. How many star lanes could humanity affect? What were their intentions? Would they share this technology? The representative, a tall, distinguished woman named Ambassador Victoria Okonkwo, answered each question calmly and carefully.
Humanity has no aggressive intentions toward any species in the galaxy. Our actions against the Verith are a direct and proportional response to their murder of more than 2,000 of our citizens, including women and children. We will not apologize for defending our people.
"You call this proportional?" demanded the Verith representative. "You have crippled our economy. You have stranded thousands of our ships. Hundreds have died."
2,118, Ambassador Okonkwo replied coldly. That is the number of humans who died in your attack, including 183 children. Tell me, Ambassador, what is the proportional response to murdering children?
The Verith representative had no answer.
We have made our demands clear, Okonkwo continued, addressing the full assembly. We require a formal acknowledgement of the Wrath responsibility for the massacre. We require reparations to be paid to the families of the victims. And we require that the Varath renounce any claim to authority over traffic in Corridor 7. These demands are reasonable, and they are non-negotiable. When they are met, we will restore the lane, not before.
"And if the Verith refuse?" asked another delegate. "If they choose to fight rather than submit?"
Chapter 7. The Long Weeks. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Verith hegemony was in crisis.
The closure of Corridor 7 was a tourniquet on the Empire's lifeblood. Supply ships that should have arrived in days were delayed for weeks. Factories on the outer worlds fell silent as raw materials dried up. Food shipments to the densely populated inner worlds began to fall behind schedule, and prices in the markets started to climb. Protests broke out on 3 worlds within the first month. The Verith security forces suppressed them brutally, as they always had, but the underlying grievances remained. For the first time, citizens of the hegemony began to question whether their rulers could actually protect them. In the conquered territories, the mood was even more volatile. Species that had been subjugated by the Verath for centuries saw an opportunity. The Kathrani, a reptilian species that had been under Verath rule for over 2,000 years, formed an underground resistance movement. The Shoal, a hive-minded species that provided much of the manual labor for Verath industrial operations, began organizing strikes. And throughout it all, the humans remained silent. Their ambassador had stated their demands and then refused to engage in further negotiation. Every Verath entreaty was met with the same response: meet the demands or the lane stays closed. Commander Thyrax, the officer who had led the attack on the convoy, was quietly arrested and tried by a military tribunal. The trial was classified, but rumors leaked out. He had been made a scapegoat, forced to take responsibility for what had been a decision made at the highest levels. His execution was broadcast on Verath state media, presented as justice being done. Humanity rejected it. Commander Thyrax was following orders, Ambassador Okonkwo stated in her response to the Verith announcement. His execution does not address the fundamental issue. We require acknowledgement of responsibility from the Verith government itself, from Overlord Myrinth and the High Council. We require an admission that the attack was deliberate, that it was sanctioned at the highest levels, and that the Verith leadership bears responsibility for the deaths of 2,118 human beings. Overlord Myrinth refused. The standoff continued. Chapter 8. Cracks in the Empire. 2 months into the closure, the first Varath territory seceded. The world of Kenth 7 had always been on the periphery of the hegemony, a mining colony that provided valuable minerals to the Verith industrial base. Its population was mixed, Vareth settlers and administrators alongside native Kethrani workers, and the economic disruption had hit it particularly hard. When the Kethrani resistance movement seized the planetary administration building and declared independence, the Vareth response was immediate and brutal. A battle fleet was dispatched to restore order, arriving after a grueling 6-week journey through alternate routes that would normally have taken mere days. They found a planet that had transformed in their absence. The Kethrani had used the time well, fortifying key positions, distributing weapons cached years ago, and most importantly, establishing communication with the humans. The battle for Kenth 7 lasted 3 weeks. The Varath eventually won. Their military technology was still superior. Their troops were still better trained, and they had no compunctions about using orbital bombardment to eliminate resistant strongholds. But it was the first time in living memory that Varath forces had faced serious opposition from a subject species. 1,600 Varath soldiers died in the fighting, along with nearly 500,000 Kethrani. And while the Varath were focused on Kenth 7, 2 more worlds declared independence. Then 5 more. The Empire was beginning to crack. They cannot hold it together, Admiral Patterson told President Morrison in their weekly strategy meeting. The logistics are impossible. They're having to dispatch forces to suppress rebellions, but those forces take weeks to arrive because all their efficient routes pass through closed lanes. By the time they get there, the rebellions have had time to consolidate. And every time they commit forces to one world, they leave other worlds vulnerable. What about their core territories? Stable for now, but increasingly restive. Food prices have tripled in some areas. Unemployment is rising as factories shut down. The civilian population is starting to ask hard questions about why their leadership picked a fight they couldn't win. Morrison nodded slowly. And the Galactic Assembly? Watching with great interest. Several species have quietly approached us about establishing formal trade relationships. They see the Vareth weakening and want to position themselves for whatever comes next. Good. Make sure those conversations continue. And the Vareth themselves? Patterson smiled grimly. We received a communication from Admiral Korth 2 days ago. Unofficial, back-channel, deniable. He's indicating that certain elements within the Vareth military are prepared to support a change in leadership if it would lead to a resolution of the current crisis. A coup? More like a forced retirement. Overlord Myrinth is old and has become a liability. If he were to step down and be replaced by someone more amenable, the way might be clear for a negotiated settlement. Morrison considered this for a long moment. And what guarantee would we have that this new leadership would honor any agreements? What's to stop them from rebuilding their strength and coming after us in 20 years? That's the key question, isn't it? Patterson leaned forward. My recommendation is that we use this opportunity to fundamentally restructure the regional power balance. The Vareth hegemony has been a destabilizing force in the galaxy for millennia. We have a chance to break it permanently, to ensure that it can never threaten anyone again. You're talking about the destruction of an 11,000-year-old empire. I'm talking about liberating a dozen species that have been subjugated and oppressed for longer than human civilization has existed. The Vareth conquered them through force. Now they'll fall because they can't control the trade routes they depend on. Patterson's expression was hard. They made themselves our enemies when they murdered our people. They showed us exactly what they are and what they're capable of. I say we finish them. Morrison was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired but resolute. God help me. I think you're right. Get me the ambassador. We have new demands to formulate. Chapter 9. The New Order. The final terms were delivered to the Varath hegemony on the 120th day of the closure. Humanity no longer demanded merely an acknowledgement of responsibility and reparations. The situation had evolved. The balance of power had shifted, and humanity intended to secure a peace that would last for generations. The new demands were comprehensive. First, the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all Varath military forces from the 12 worlds that had declared independence during the crisis. These worlds would be recognized as sovereign entities under the protection of a new regional alliance, an alliance that humanity would help to establish and guarantee. Second, the permanent demilitarization of all Varath-claimed space along Corridor 7. No warships, no military installations, no armed stations. The corridor would become a neutral transit zone, open to all species, patrolled by an international force with human participation. Third, war reparations equivalent to 50% of Varath gross domestic product over the next decade, to be distributed among the liberated species as compensation for centuries of exploitation and oppression. Fourth, the personal surrender of Overlord Myrinth and the members of the High Council who had authorized the attack. They would face trial before an international tribunal for crimes against humanity, the first time such a tribunal had ever been convened to judge non-human beings. And finally, humanity would retain the capability to close any star lane in Varath-claimed space at any time, for any reason, in perpetuity. This capability would serve as a guarantee of Varath compliance with all terms of the agreement. The demands were, in effect, a demand for the end of the Varath hegemony as a galactic power, and to everyone's surprise, the Varath accepted. It was Admiral Korth who brought the news. Admiral Korth, who had staged his quiet coup 3 weeks earlier and who now led a transitional military government. Overlord Myrinth was dead, his body found in his private chambers in circumstances that were officially described as natural causes, but that everyone understood to be somewhat more deliberate. "We accept your terms," Korth said in his transmission to the human government. "We have no choice. Our economy is in ruins. Our subject species are in revolt. Our military is stretched beyond breaking trying to maintain order. You have won." Ambassador Okonkwo received the surrender with the dignity appropriate to the moment. "We take no pleasure in your suffering," she replied. "We wanted only justice for our dead. The situation escalated because your leadership refused to accept responsibility and sought to continue intimidating us instead of negotiating in good faith." "I understand. For what it's worth, I opposed the attack from the beginning. I warned the Overlord that the humans were not like the other species we had dealt with. But he was old and set in his ways. He believed that force was the only language the galaxy understood."
He was wrong. Yes. Korth paused, his 4 eyes blinking in what might have been sorrow or simply fatigue. He was wrong. And now the Varath will pay the price for his arrogance for generations to come. The peace treaty was signed aboard the human battleship Unity in neutral space near Corridor 7. Representatives from 12 species witnessed the ceremony, species that had suffered under Varath rule and were now seeing their oppressors brought low. There were tears among some of the delegations, tears of joy and vindication after centuries of humiliation. Admiral Korth signed on behalf of the Varath, his chitinous hand moving across the document with the slow deliberation of someone who understood that he was signing away everything his people had built. It was, in many ways, the end of Varath civilization as it had existed. They would rebuild, eventually. They would adapt and find a new place in the galaxy.
but they would never again be the dominant power they had been. And as the ceremony concluded, as the various dignitaries prepared to depart, a young Kethrani diplomat approached Ambassador Okonkwo. She was barely out of adolescence by her species standards, her scales still bright with the colors of youth, her eyes wide with an emotion that transcended species boundaries. "Thank you," she said simply. "For 2,000 years my people suffered under the Verath. We thought there was no hope. We thought we would be their slaves forever. And then you came. You humans, who we had never even heard of until a few years ago. And you did what no one in the galaxy thought was possible. You broke them." Okonkwo looked at the young Kethrani, at the hope shining in her alien eyes, and felt the weight of what humanity had done. They had started a war, a strange war, fought with economics rather than weapons, but a war nonetheless. They had destroyed an empire. They had liberated species they had never met, changed the fate of billions of beings across dozens of worlds. And they had done it all because some Verath commander had decided that human lives didn't matter. "We didn't do this for glory," Okonkwo said gently. "We did it because we had to, because the alternative was to accept that our people could be murdered without consequence. We couldn't do that." "Nevertheless," the Kethrani said, "you have given us our freedom. You have given all of us our freedom. We will not forget." Chapter 10. The Lessons Learned. In the years that followed, historians would debate the significance of the Corridor 7 incident and its aftermath. Some called it the most significant event in galactic history since the disappearance of the Builders. Others dismissed it as merely a regional conflict that had been exaggerated by human propagandists. But on one point, everyone agreed: the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Humanity's control of the star lanes was now an open secret. Other species studied the technology, tried to replicate it, sought to develop countermeasures. None succeeded. The knowledge that the Builders had embedded in their ancient infrastructure was simply beyond the capabilities of any contemporary civilization. Any civilization except humanity, who had somehow found the key. The United Earth Government established the Lane Authority, an international body responsible for maintaining and regulating the star lanes that passed through human-controlled space. Species that maintained good relationships with humanity found their transit times shortened, their commerce flowing smoothly. Species that proved hostile found their trade routes mysteriously experiencing technical difficulties. It was power on a scale that no single species had wielded in recorded history. And humanity wielded it carefully, aware that arrogance and overreach were the seeds of their own destruction. The memorial for the victims of the massacre was built on a small moon near the site of the attack. The names of all 2,118 humans who had died were inscribed on a wall of black granite brought from Earth itself, a piece of the homeworld set among the stars. At the center of the memorial stood a statue of Captain Sarah Chen, depicted at the moment of her final order, her hand raised in a gesture that seemed to encompass both defiance and protection. She had died trying to save her people. She had failed. But in that failure, she had set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy. At the base of the statue, a simple inscription: "We came in peace. They answered with violence. We responded with justice." And above the inscription, the motto that humanity had adopted in the aftermath of the crisis, words that would come to define their place in the galaxy for centuries to come: "Never again, for anyone." Epilogue. 100 years later. The Galactic Assembly had grown considerably since the days of the Corridor 7 incident. 47 species now held full membership, up from 22 in the pre-human era.
The Vareth still existed, a chastened remnant of their former glory, but they no longer bullied and conquered. They couldn't afford to. At the center of the assembly hall, Ambassador Kellis Okonkwo Singh, great-great-granddaughter of Victoria Okonkwo, addressed the gathered delegates. The topic was a proposed expansion of the Lane Authority to include previously uncharted regions of the galaxy. There was debate, as there always was, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Humanity had become the quiet center of galactic civilization. Not through conquest, they had relatively few territorial holdings compared to some species. Not through cultural dominance. Human art and entertainment were popular, but so were the creative works of many other species. Not even through pure technological superiority. Others had caught up in most areas. They had achieved their position through something more fundamental: trust. When humanity made a commitment, they kept it. When they signed a treaty, they honored it. When they said they would protect someone, they protected them. It was a reputation that had taken a century to build, a reputation purchased in blood at Corridor 7 and maintained through countless acts of integrity in the years since. After the session adjourned, Kellis made her way to the Terran mission's private offices. Waiting for her was an unexpected visitor, a Varath diplomat named Korth 17, descendant of the admiral who had surrendered to humanity a century ago. "Ambassador," he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard, "I wondered if I might have a moment of your time." "Of course, diplomat. How can I help you?" "I wanted to speak to you about history, about what your ancestors did to mine." He paused, his 4 eyes studying her carefully. "My people have spent 100 years hating humanity, hating you for what you did to our empire, for the humiliations you forced upon us. That hatred has defined us, warped us, made us less than we could be." Kellis nodded slowly. "I understand. But I've been reading recently, studying the actual records of the incident, not the propaganda that my government has promoted for generations. And I realized something." Korth 17's voice dropped slightly. "My ancestors murdered 2,000 of your people. They killed children. And your response, terrible as it was for us, could have been so much worse." "What do you mean?" "You could have destroyed us. You had the power. You still have the power. You could shut down every lane in our space, strangle us completely. You could have demanded our complete dissolution, scattered our people across the galaxy as refugees. But you didn't. You demanded justice for your dead, and you demanded that we stop threatening others. And when we agreed, you kept your word." He straightened, his posture shifting into something that looked almost like respect. "I came to tell you that there's a new movement among my people, younger Varath who are tired of the old hatred, who want to build something new with humanity, with the galaxy. We don't have much influence yet, but we're growing." That's wonderful to hear, diplomat. "We have a long way to go. Centuries of bad blood don't wash away easily. But I wanted you to know that your ancestors' mercy, and yes, I call it mercy, despite the devastation they inflicted, that mercy is finally bearing fruit. The Varath who killed your people believed that only force mattered in the galaxy. Your response showed them that they were wrong. And now, 100 years later, we're finally starting to understand what that means." Kellis found herself unexpectedly moved. She had grown up hearing the stories of Corridor 7, of Captain Chen's sacrifice, of her great-great-grandmother's steely negotiations. It had always seemed like ancient history, important but distant. Now, looking at this Varath diplomat with his earnest eyes and hopeful words, She understood that the work was still ongoing, that every generation had to choose, again and again, whether to perpetuate old hatreds or build new understanding. "Thank you for telling me this," she said. "And please, tell your people that humanity welcomes the new direction. We never wanted to be your enemies. We just wanted to protect our own." "I know. I think, deep down, we always knew. We just weren't willing to admit it." Korth 17 departed, and Kellis stood alone in her office, looking out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there was the site of the massacre, now a memorial, now a reminder of both the worst and the best of what sentient beings could be. They had attacked a human convoy. Humanity had shut down their entire star lane. And in the end, somehow, the galaxy was better for it. The stars continued to shine as they always had and always would. Ships moved along the lanes that humanity had learned to control, carrying goods and ideas and people from world to world. The work of civilization went on, messy, difficult, sometimes violent, but ultimately trending towards something better. That was humanity's contribution. Not just the technology that had won them their place in the galaxy, not just the military might that had humbled the Verith, but something more subtle and more enduring, the stubborn belief that tomorrow could be better than today, if only people were willing to work for it. It was a belief that had sustained them through the dark years of their own history, through wars and plagues and famines, through the long climb from mud-brick villages to star-faring civilization. And now it sustained the galaxy. Never again. For anyone. The end.